Stealing $1 billion without leaving the room is possible. I know this because I've seen footage of people who have almost done it. My name is Mr. Dark Web, and what I'm about to share today will forever change the way you think about money security in the digital age. February 2016. While the world was watching the US elections and the Olympics in Brazil, a group of people in a dark room somewhere in Asia were preparing to rewrite the history of cybercrime. They wore no masks. They didn't break into vaults. Their weapons were keyboards, and their targets were the central bank of an entire nation. It's a story I've been piecing together. Fragments from Darknet forums, leaks from insiders, surveillance footage from Manila casinos that surfaced where it shouldn't have. Some participants in these events are still at large. Others, let's just say their silence wasn't bought with money. But the worst part of this story is not the scale of the theft. It's how close they came to success. Morning of the 5th of February 2016, Dhaka, Bangladesh. The central bank employee, referred to as M in the Darknet archives, came to work earlier than usual. At 9 a.m. local time, the International Transfer Department greeted him with an unusual silence. But it was something else that alerted him. The printer was silent. This Swift-connected printer used to spit out dozens of pages every morning. Transaction confirmations, requests, notifications. Bangladesh Bank, as the country's central bank, handled millions of dollars worth of transactions every day. The printer was the voice of the system, its physical embodiment in the world of paper and ink. At first he thought of jammed paper, then he checked the indicators. Dead. The screen didn't glow. The power button was unresponsive. The cable was in place. The technician he called confirmed his worst fears. The printer software was corrupted, deliberately. At this time, 12,500 kilometers from Dhaka, in New York City, a Federal Reserve Bank employee was staring at the screen with growing bewilderment. $101 million had disappeared from the reserve account of the Bangladesh Bank in the past few hours. 35 payment orders, all with the correct authorization codes, all through the secure SWIFT system. Everything looked legit, except for one detail. The amounts were huge and the recipients unusual. According to information I received through contacts in the Asian cyber underground, the Lazarus hacker group was in a rented room somewhere on the border between China and North Korea. They hadn't slept in 48 hours. Months of preparation had come down to those hours. January, they spent studying the bank's internal system through embedded malware. Every process, every procedure, every weakness was studied and recorded. The choice of time was a masterpiece of planning. Friday in a Muslim country meant the end of the working week. Saturday and Sunday paralyzed New York. And the 8th of February, Chinese New Year, guaranteed that the Philippine banks where the money was going would be closed. 5 days head start. 5 days to launder the money through Manila's casinos and disappear into the digital fog. On their monitors, the status of the first 5 transactions glowed green. $81 million was on its way. But the remaining 30 transactions, $850 million, were still being processed by the system. It was then that an FRB employee in New York revealed the details of transaction number 6. $20 million was to go to the Shalika Foundation in Sri Lanka. His trained eye spotted the anomaly instantly. The payment order said Shalika Foundation, Knee Foundation. In the world of international wire transfers, where every letter is triple-checked, such mistakes don't happen. It was a red flag screaming fraud. The employee reached for the phone to contact Deutsche Bank, which had brokered the transaction. In a rented room on the border between the two countries, Lazarus Group members saw the status of the remaining transactions change. In processing became suspended. $850 million hung in the digital space between Dhaka and New York. One of the hackers, known on the Darknet under the pseudonym Architect, began frantically checking the system logs. Where's the error? What went wrong? Months of preparation, a perfect plan, flawless execution, and it all fell apart because of something they'd missed. What they didn't know yet was that one letter had ruined them. A typo someone on the team had made while preparing the payment documents. Maybe from fatigue, perhaps from haste. Perhaps it was just ironic that the greatest digital heist in history had failed because of the most human of all mistakes. But time was already working against them. The FRB security system noticed another anomaly. One of the recipients in the Philippines had the word Jupiter in its address. The same name was carried by an Iranian ship under sanctions. Automated systems raised the alarm. In Dhaka, technicians were still fiddling with the printer, unaware that their national reserve had already lost an amount equal to 5% of the country's annual budget. But very soon the printer will be working, and then the real nightmare will begin. To understand how the robbery of the century happened, we need to go back a few years. In 2011, the world learned about the existence of a group that would later receive many names: Lazarus Group, Guardians of Peace, Hidden Cobra, Zinc. But on the Darknet they were called more simply Shadows. According to files I received from a former employee of a cybersecurity company, Lazarus started small. DDoS attacks on South Korean banks and TV channels. Then there was the year 2013 and the attempted hack of Sonali Bank in the same Bangladesh. A trial balloon, a dress rehearsal. They didn't have enough experience then, but they were learning. The year 2014 brought them glory. The Sony Pictures Entertainment hack rocked Hollywood. Terabytes of internal correspondence, unreleased films, employees' personal data, all were in the public domain. The world saw what hackers from a country that many thought was technologically backward were capable of, but that was just the beginning. In Pyongyang, in an unmarked building on a street whose name doesn't appear on Google Maps, Division 121, North Korea's elite cyber warfare unit, operated. Of the 6,000 hackers trained by the regime, only 300 made it here. The best of the best. Park Jin-hyuk, whose name would later appear in FBI indictment documents, was one of them. A graduate of Pyongyang University of Computer Technology, he spent 3 years in China studying Western banking systems under the guise of working for an IT company. His specialty was SWIFT, an international bank transfer system used by 11,000 financial institutions in 200 countries. SWIFT was considered impregnable, not because it could not be technically hacked. Any system can be hacked, but because for a successful theft, it was necessary not just to gain access. You had to understand the procedures, know the right codes, mimic the behavior of legitimate users. It required months, if not years, of training. In the autumn of 2015, the Lazarus Group was given an assignment that, according to my sources, came from the top. North Korea needed money. Sanctions were strangling the economy. The nuclear program required billions. Traditional sources of revenue, smuggling, drugs, counterfeit dollars, no longer covered the costs. The plan was audacious in its simplicity. Find a bank in a developing country with weak security. Get access to their SWIFT system. Wait for the right moment. And empty their reserve account at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, where most of the world's central banks kept their dollars. The choice was Bangladesh, a country of 160 million people, a rapidly growing economy, but an outdated cybersecurity infrastructure. The budget for the entire IT department of the central bank was $250,000 a year, less than the salary of a good security specialist in Silicon Valley. In January of 2016, the operation began. The first step was to penetrate the bank's network. According to reports that later leaked onto the Darknet, the hackers used targeted phishing. Several bank employees received letters that looked like normal work correspondence. It was enough for one to open the attachment. The malware they used was a programming masterpiece. It wasn't just stealing data, it was learning. It recorded how employees logged into the SWIFT system, what passwords they use, what time they send transactions, what real payment orders look like. The program even studied the handwriting of digital signatures, the unique style of each operator when entering data. But the most ingenious was the code responsible for the printer. The hackers knew that Bangladesh Bank used an old system. All SWIFT transactions were automatically printed out for manual verification. This was their Achilles heel. If the printer didn't work, no one would see suspicious transfers until it was too late. For 3 weeks, the program sat quietly in the system, transmitting data to servers somewhere in China. The hackers studied their victim like a surgeon studies anatomy before surgery. They knew they'd only get one chance, one shot to steal $1 billion. By the end of January, everything was ready. They had compiled a list of 35 transactions totaling $951 million. The recipients were carefully selected, individuals and organizations in the Philippines and Sri Lanka, countries with relatively lax banking regulations. Accounts were opened in advance in fictitious names through intermediaries. All that remained was to wait for the perfect moment. And it came on the first Friday in February. Everything was coming together. A weekend in 3 time zones, a holiday in the Philippines, minimal staff in banks, a cosmic alignment of planets for digital heist. On the 4th of February, Thursday evening Dhaka time, the hackers activated the final phase. The malware disabled the printer and started sending payment orders, one by one with the correct codes, signatures, all the necessary authorizations. The SWIFT system accepted them as authentic. In New York, the FRB's automated systems began processing the requests. For them, these were routine transactions from a trusted partner, the central bank of a sovereign state. The first transaction went through, the second, the third, fourth, the fifth. $81 million began its journey through the world's financial system to accounts in the Philippines. The hackers were one step away from taking the remaining $870 million, and then one of them made a mistake that saved the world banking system from disaster. The 5th of February 2016, 3 o'clock in the morning, Dhaka time. In New York, it was still Thursday, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The perfect time for transactions. American banks were working, Asian banks were asleep. The Lazarus Group team was watching the monitors in a rented space, which, according to the Darknet, was in the Chinese border city of Dandong. The first 5 transactions went smoothly. $20 million went to an account at Rizal Commercial Banking Corporation in the Philippines in the name of Alfred Santos Vergara. Another $30 million went into an account for Enrico Teodoro Vasquez at the same bank. The names were fictitious and the documents were forged, but the quality of the forgeries was so high that the bank did not suspect anything. The remaining $31 million was distributed among 3 other accounts. All 5 accounts had been opened in May 2015 and had been lying untouched ever since, accumulating a history of ordinary small transactions so as not to arouse suspicion. But the real prize was ahead. The 30 remaining transactions were to bring in $870 million. The largest transfer, $350 million, was addressed to an account at the same RCBC. If it went through, it would become the largest single bank transfer in Philippine history. At 4:30 in the morning Dhaka time, the hackers sent the 6th transaction, $20 million to the Shalika Foundation in Sri Lanka. The organization existed in reality, a small charity helping local farmers. The hackers chose it specifically. Small, obscure, but real. Perfect cover. The transaction went into the SWIFT system and began its journey through the maze of international banking protocols. From Dhaka to New York, from New York to Deutsche Bank, which acted as a correspondent bank for the transfer to Sri Lanka. It was at Deutsche Bank that the first alarm went off. A compliance officer, whose name never appeared in public reports, noticed the discrepancy. In the bank's database, Shalika Foundation was recorded as Shalika Foundation. On the payment order, it was Shalika Foundation. Normally, this would have gone unnoticed, but $20 million is a sum that automatically requires extra attention. A staff member opened the transfer history of Bangladesh Bank. In the last 6 months, the largest transfer was $2 million. Suddenly, there was a series of transactions worth hundreds of millions. Deutsche Bank sent a request to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Check transaction number 6. Possible fraud. At the FRB, the request went to an analyst who was already starting to worry. The bank's security system raised a red flag on another transaction. The recipient's address in the Philippines included Jupiter Street. Jupiter is also the name of an Iranian tanker under UN sanctions. A coincidence? Perhaps. But in the world of international finance, coincidences can be worth billions. The analyst made a decision that saved $870 million. He froze all remaining transactions and sent an emergency request to the Bangladesh Bank. Confirmed the authenticity of the payment orders. The problem was that it was already Friday, the end of the working day in Dhaka. The central bank offices were closing, and the printer that was supposed to print the request notice was still broken. In Dandong, panic was growing. On the monitors, the status of 30 transactions was frozen and additional verification required. The hackers tried to figure out what had gone wrong. They checked the logs, looked for traces of detection, analyzed the traffic. Nothing. Their malware was still controlling the bank's system, but the money wasn't flowing. One member of the group, known by the nickname Collector, began looking at the documents they had sent. Line by line, character by character. In the 23rd minute of searching, he found it. A typo. Foundation instead of foundation. According to what later appeared on hacker forums, a dead silence hung in the room. Months of preparation, a perfect plan, flawless execution, and everything is ruined because of one letter. Someone on the team made a mistake while preparing the documents. Perhaps it was fatigue. They had been working without sleep for the 3rd day. Perhaps it was a peculiarity of the North Korean keyboard when typing Latin, or just human error. But the time for finding the culprits would come later. Right now, they had to save the operation. They still had $81 million in transit. That money had to be laundered and out before the world knew about the theft. Plan B went into action. People were already waiting in the Philippines. As soon as the money arrived in the RCBC accounts, it would be immediately transferred onwards, some of it into cash through money changers, some to casinos, where the trail of money would be lost among the chips and bets, some into jewelry and real estate. On Monday, the 8th of February, the Philippines celebrated Chinese New Year. The banks were closed, but the casinos were open, and it was there, amid the clinking of coins and shuffling of cards, that the stolen millions began their transformation from digital records to real assets. In Manila, in the private VIP lounges of the Soler and Midas casinos, unknown players bet $1 million at a time. They were playing Baccarat, a game where the odds are almost equal, and losing can be put down to bad luck. Some lost, others won. Money flowed from account to account, losing touch with its original source. Kim Wong, owner of the Eastern Hawaii Leisure Company casino, would later admit to receiving $31 million for Chinese high rollers. He claimed he had no knowledge of the origin of the money. $15 million he would later return to authorities. The remaining 16 will disappear into the labyrinths of Asia's shadow economy. Meanwhile, it was Monday morning in Dhaka. Technicians had finally fixed the printer, replacing the damaged software. The first thing Central Bank Governor Atiur Rahman, returning from a weekend away, saw was a stack of finger-thick printouts. 35 payment orders, $951 million, 5 transactions executed, 30 rejected. The governor looked at the numbers and couldn't believe his eyes. Someone had tried to steal almost $1 billion, and they had partially succeeded. 8th of February, 2016, 9 a.m., Dhaka time. An emergency meeting was convened in the office of the governor of the central bank. Atiur Rahman still could not believe what was happening. $81 million, 5% of the country's foreign exchange reserves, had disappeared. The first thing contacted was the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. The answer came quickly and was crushing. Yes, the transactions had been completed. Yes, all authorization codes were correct. No, the money can't be returned. It's already gone to the Philippines. And yes, you sent those payment orders yourself through your SWIFT system. Panic gripped the bank. How did this happen? Who did it? And most importantly, can the money be recovered? The investigation began immediately. The first to arrive were specialists from World Informatics, a local SWIFT partner. What they discovered shocked everyone. The malware was introduced into the system back in January. For a whole month it had been sitting quietly on the network, writing, studying, preparing. The code was complex, professional. This was not the work of amateurs. Not only did it steal credentials, it could mimic the behavior of legitimate users, generate the right authorization codes, even forge digital signatures. But the most sophisticated was the module responsible for the printer. He deliberately disabled it at just the right moment so that no one would notice the suspicious transactions. A parallel investigation began in the Philippines. Investigators from the Anti-Money Laundering Commission arrived at the RCBC office on the 9th of February. What they learned there only made the situation worse. All 5 of the accounts into which the money had come had been opened in fictitious names. The documents were forged, but of such high quality that they had passed all the bank's checks. Moreover, the accounts had been opened as early as May 2015, 9 months before the robbery. Someone had been planning this operation for almost a year. The manager of RCBC's Jupiter Street branch, Maya Santos de Guido, claimed she had no knowledge of the fraud, but investigators found an oddity. All 5 accounts were opened through her branch. All the paperwork passed through her hands, and she was the one who authorized the immediate withdrawal as soon as the money arrived. By the time investigators got to the accounts, they were empty. The money had gone further, to currency broker Philrem Felix, who converted it into Philippine pesos, then back into dollars, muddling the trail. Some of the money was withdrawn in cash. Bags of millions of dollars were taken out of the bank in broad daylight. But the bulk of it, about 50 million, went to the casino. And here the investigators encountered a problem. In 2016, casinos in the Philippines did not fall under the anti-money laundering law. They weren't required to report suspicious transactions. They didn't keep detailed player records, and most importantly, had the right to customer privacy. Something incredible was going on in the Soler and Midas casinos. Unknown players who introduced themselves as Chinese businessmen were playing for sums rarely seen even in VIP rooms. $1 million on a single bet in baccarat, $2 million on roulette. They lost and won with such indifference as if they were playing for matches. Casino employees later said the players were behaving strangely. They weren't celebrating their winnings. They didn't get upset when they lost, just methodically betting, playing, exchanging chips. Some didn't even touch the free drinks. Unheard of behavior for high rollers. Kim Wong, a key figure in the scheme, appeared to be a simple junket operator, a man who brings wealthy players to casinos for a commission. But his role was much deeper than that. It was through his company, Eastern Hawaii Leisure, that much of the stolen money passed through. He would later admit that he received instructions from two Chinese nationals, Ding Jiji and Gao Shushua, but those names turned out to be as false as everything else in the story. Meanwhile, the international investigation was gaining momentum. The FBI got involved in the case as early as the 10th of February. They were interested not only in the theft, but also in the methods. The handwriting was familiar. Too familiar. Symantec experts were the first to spot the similarities. The malware code had unique markers, specific functions, variable names, even the style of comments. They had seen it all before. In the code used in the Sony Pictures hack of 2014, BAE Systems, a British cybersecurity company, did their own analysis. Their conclusion was unequivocal. It was the work of the Lazarus Group, North Korean state-sponsored hackers, the same ones who terrorized South Korea, hacked Hollywood, and have now moved on to outright bank robbery. But proving North Korea's involvement was nearly impossible. The servers used to control the hack were in China. The IP addresses went nowhere. All traces ended at the border of the world's most closed country. In March 2016, the unexpected happened. In Sri Lanka, a suspicious transfer of $20 million, the same transaction with a typo, was detained. The Pan Asia Bank, through which the money was to pass, froze it at the request of the authorities. The $20 million was recovered. A small victory amidst a general catastrophe, but the bulk of the money, some $63 million, was gone forever. The trail ended in Macau, the gambling capital of Asia. From there, intelligence reports say, the money went to North Korea through a network of shell companies and cryptocurrency exchanges. For Bangladesh Bank, the consequences were catastrophic. Atiur Rahman resigned on the 15th of March, taking responsibility for the security failure. RCBC was fined 1 billion pesos, the largest fine in the history of the Philippine banking regulator. Maya de Guido was sentenced to prison for money laundering, although she still maintains her innocence. SWIFT has launched a global program to improve security. New protocols, mandatory two-factor authentication, anomaly detection systems. But everyone realized the bitter truth. If Lazarus could do it once, they would try again. And they did. In October of 2016, an attempt to steal $60 million from Tien Phong Bank in Vietnam. In December, an attack on a bank in Ecuador. 2017, Far Eastern International Bank in Taiwan, $60 million stolen. 2018, Banco de Chile, $10 million. Lazarus Group turned the theft of money into an assembly line. But none of the subsequent operations reached the scale of the Bangladeshi heist, because the world was warned, with one typo. There is a theory in forensic science called the low-card principle. A criminal always leaves a trace. In the physical world, this can be fingerprints, hair, skin particles. In the digital world, Lazarus Group left something more interesting. Handwriting. Analysis of the malicious code used in the robbery revealed surprising details. The programmers who wrote it did not study at Western universities. Their style betrayed the North Korean school of programming. Specific constructions unique to Pyongyang University of Computer Technology. Even the errors in the English code comments follow the patterns of Korean grammar. But the most revealing was the timestamp of the code compilation. The program was compiled during working hours, Pyongyang time. Not at night like normal hackers work. Not on weekends. On a normal working day, 9 to 6. It was work. The normal office work of government employees. In August 2018, the U.S. Department of Justice indicted Park Jin-hyuk, the only hacker whose real name had been identified. The 179-page indictment detailed his role not only in the Bangladesh bank heist, but in dozens of other cyber attacks around the world. Pak was a ghost. No photos except for one blurry one from his university days. No social media footprints. Just aliases on the Darknet and millions of lines of malicious code. The man who nearly brought down the world's banking system remained a shadow. But why North Korea? The answer came from defectors and intelligence analysts. The regime desperately needed money. Sanctions after the nuclear test had cut off almost all sources of currency. Traditional methods, arms sales, drug trafficking, currency counterfeiting, no longer worked. The world has learned how to track them. Cyberattacks have become the perfect solution. Low cost, high return, almost zero risk. Even if you get caught, what can they do? Put more sanctions on a country that is already under every possible sanction? Arrest hackers who never leave North Korea? The UN estimates that by the year 2022, the Lazarus Group and its affiliated groups had stolen more than $2 billion in cryptocurrency and fiat money. These funds went directly to finance nuclear and missile programs. Each coin stolen brought Pyongyang closer to building an intercontinental ballistic missile. But back to the typo. One letter. The difference between foundation and fandation saved $870 million. Had it not been for that mistake, the consequences would have been catastrophic. Imagine, the central bank of a sovereign nation loses $1 billion over a weekend. Panic in the currency markets, the collapse of the taka, Bangladesh's national currency, a banking crisis that could spread throughout South Asia, and worst of all, a precedent. If you can rob one central bank, why not try it with others? SWIFT processes $5 trillion worth of transactions every day. If hackers proved that the system was vulnerable, trust in it would collapse. And without SWIFT, the global financial system would have returned to the 19th century, to paper checks and couriers with suitcases of money. The typo was a salvation, but it also became a warning. In the SWIFT report for the year 2019-19, there were 1,200 attempts to hack into banking systems. Most of them were repelled, but some have succeeded. Vietnam's Tien Phong Bank lost $1 million before it stopped the theft. Ecuador's Banco del Austro, $12 million. Taiwan's Far Eastern International Bank, $60 million. India's City Union Bank nearly lost $2 million. All of these attacks bore the Lazarus signature. The Philippines learned its lesson. In 2017, casinos were included in the list of organizations obliged to report suspicious transactions, but it was too late. The money was gone, the trail was gone, and the criminals went unpunished. RCBC is still suing Bangladesh Bank. The Philippine bank claims to have been victimized by the fraudsters as much as the Bangladeshis. Bangladesh Bank is demanding compensation for all losses. Courts are going on in New York, Manila, Dhaka. Lawyers are getting rich, but the money is not being recovered. Kim Wong, after recovering $15 million, disappeared from public view. His casino continues to operate. No one asks too many questions. After all, he was just a middleman too. Or was he? Maya de Guido, the only person who went to prison in the case, was released in 2022. She continues to claim that she was a patsy, that the real organizers remained in the shadows. She may be right. What about the Lazarus Group? They didn't stop. The year 2017 brought the world WannaCry, an encryption virus that infected 300,000 computers in 150 countries. 2022nd year, Axie Infinity hack, 620 million in cryptocurrency was stolen. 2022nd year, Harmony hack, $100 million. 2023, Atomic Wallet, 35 million. They learn, they adapt, they evolve. Each failure makes them stronger. Each success funds new attacks. And somewhere in Pyongyang, in a building without a sign, a new generation of hackers is learning from the mistakes of the past. They know there won't be a typo next time. The story I have told you is not over. It is continuing right now as you listen to these words. There is a forum on the Darknet that I won't tell you the name of. There, amidst discussions of hacks and leaks, there are occasional posts in Korean. They are written through multiple proxies, encrypted so that even the NSA can't read them. But sometimes, very rarely, screenshots appear. Banking systems, SWIFT transaction schemes, vulnerabilities that haven't been closed yet, and a list of targets. I've seen that list. Your bank could be on it. Lazarus Group has become a legend on the Darknet. Not heroes. Even there, they realize the dangers of what they're doing. But they are respected for professionalism, for daring, for showing that no system is invulnerable. That's what's important to understand. The Bangladesh bank robbery wasn't just a heist. It was a test of how far to go. And the answer was very far. Every day, trillions of dollars fly over fiber optic cables, numbers on screens, bits in the memory of servers. The entire global economy rests on trust in those numbers, on the belief that when you open a banking app, your money will be there. But what if it's not? I don't want to scare you, but I do want you to understand. The world has changed. Criminals don't rob banks with guns anymore. They do it with keyboards. And the only thing that stopped them in February 2/16/16 was a typo. One letter saved $1 billion. One human error stopped the perfect digital crime. The irony is that in a world where we increasingly trust machines, It is human error that is both salvation and damnation. Next time, there may not be a typo. Or there will be, but not in the bank's favor. And then you'll wake up in the morning, open your banking app, and see zero where your savings were yesterday. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. Thank you for listening to this story. And remember, in the digital world, you're only as safe as the weakest link in the chain. And the weakest link is always a human being. Be careful. Double check. And never, ever make typos in important documents. You never know which one might be worth $1 billion. As always, Mr. Dark Web,